the other question that you didn't ask, but somebody asked yesterday was, well, how do I record revenues at the farmer's market? I don't own a cash register, and it's too crazy, right? Does anybody write down every transaction at the farmer's market? Really? Successfully?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, you ought to come up and teach this, because
Just to make a list of everything beforehand, and then you just
check. Yeah. Well, here. I'm going to let you say this.
Oh. I just make a list of everything that I take to market before I go, and then at the sale, I just make little check marks. But you do have to get kind of good, like a waiter that takes your order that's not writing it down. You just have to stand there and hand people the vegetables and keep it in your head and then mark it down once they leave. Right.
So let me give you an alternative, because unfortunately I cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm very impressed with you. I really can't do it. I've been in that kind of a situation. I just personally can't do it. And so what we have learned to do when we're in a similar kind of a situation is just do a great job of taking inventory before we leave, do a great job of taking inventory when we get home. And then we know how much we sold. And that's the way that I do it. So whatever way works for you, do what works for you. In all of these things, there are multiple ways to get to the right answer. And you're going to have to find the system that is best for your personality, for your habits, for your nature. Okay, so what I asked Carl to do, because he was recording all his revenues by week and by crop, which is great, but not by market. And if you don't record your revenues by market, you cannot analyze whether you're, spending a tremendous amount of time at a certain market and it's actually not paying off for you. So at farmers markets, we've just talked about how to do it. At the CSA, we've just talked about how to do it. It's actually easier for these wholesale customers like grasshoppers. And so what I did was set up Carl's spreadsheet so that it's no additional work for him. All he does is, instead of entering the revenue in that first spreadsheet, he's entering it's the same exact spreadsheet, but he's just putting the grasshoppers things here, and then he's going over to this one and putting the good foods ones in here, and it's all summed automatically. So if you can see.
I think these are made up numbers, by the way.
Well, I think these are all made-up numbers. Oh, they are made-up numbers. That's right. Yeah, because he hadn't done it, so I had to make it up. So it's all made up. But it illustrates the actual numbers are all real. They're just in the wrong markets, right? Yeah, because I took your spreadsheet. They're just in the wrong markets. But anyway, does everybody understand what I just described? Because it's not any additional work, and then it sums automatically into the front sheet, so you can still get all your totals. But what's really helpful about this is, so now it's the time for Carl to do his market plans. Do any of you all do market plans? Carl, describe your market plans, because this is a very important exercise to do over the course of the winter. It'll help you with your farm plan, with your seed purchasing. And if you start with last year's, if you recorded everything by market, you can just start with that and now sit down with Laura at Grasshoppers and say, here's what you bought from me last year. Let's talk about what should change this year. And then you have your production plan for Grasshoppers, and then you can go to your other markets.
Well, for years I did a really loose market plan. I mean, really loose. Like we all have a pretty good.
Here's a picture of it up, a little bit.
Okay, good.
Just to give an idea.
Okay, great. And to be honest with you, I didn't really get with it as far as putting together a really solid market plan until the middle of this summer. Okay, so using the techniques in Richard's book, I took a look at what my markets were, looked at the history of them, what I felt comfortable myself growing in the fall, what I knew I could produce well and what I could do a good job at. I made a list of all those items, and then I looked at what markets I have, including the CSA, Good Foods, Grasshoppers. I've trimmed my markets way down to something that I feel like I can actually handle. I don't do a lot of restaurants and stores. from that, we look at, this is a little different than the technique I was actually using. What's the oh, that's a units?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
If it's a pound or a bunch.
Mm-hmm, okay. And then the price that, let's see, you've actually thrown this together.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just took it off of your market
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
This was your- this
Okay.
was
Well, so the point is that I guess is to look at what your markets can handle, and that means communicating with the produce managers, with the chefs that you work with the buyers like at Grasshoppers to know what their capacity is, and to blend that with what your ability is to produce. Be realistic. That's key. Be realistic, because you can come up with something that looks really, really fantastic, but it's going to stress you out in a big way to try to produce those quantities. But the point is that by planning this out ahead of time, you can actually plan each of your seedings, your transplantings, everything. It's like clockwork. Now, there's a lot of variables that are going to get thrown in, right? We all know that. It's going to start raining. The soil's too wet to till, things like that. But this gives you at least a framework that you can work with. Having the market plan is key to then moving on to a production plan.
So the other thing that's useful, he talked about being realistic. If you start with last year's numbers, it's pretty realistic, right? I mean, granted, this year's going to change and this crop's going to fail, whereas that crop will do better. But it's a great place to start. And so, again, think how easy this is if you've been recording things by market. You literally, your market plan for the next year, draft 1, is already done. Now you want to look at it and say, that variety didn't work. I'm not going to do that again. Let's take that one out. I'd like to add this or grow more of that. That worked really well. The market liked it. And then critical step, which Carl and I have talked a lot about, but we haven't gotten to here yet, is the importance of communicating with your markets. You absolutely have to sit down with those markets, with the market plan, and get on the same page and have that, whether it's Laura or somebody else say to you, actually you want to increase kohlrabi, but we don't want to buy it. So let's get on the same page about that. Or, the quality of this was really terrific. People loved it. Would you mind increasing production of that? So make sure you over-communicate with your markets to any degree that you can. Now, at the farmer's market, you kind of get that communication and feedback week in and week out. But even your CSA members, it's great to, ask them for some feedback. What did you love? What would you like to see more of? Anytime you can get feedback from your market, figure out a way to do that, and your production plan will get better and better.
I think sort of like my metaphor for this is you can take a trip and ride in the back seat, or you can put yourself in the driver's seat and really have some control over what your farm is able to produce and what your farm's able to sell.
Okay. Now we move into actually to the really hard part, because we've done a pretty good job of overall revenues and overall expenses and even breaking it down a little bit by market. But at the end of the day, you need to know what price works for your crops. And the only way to do that is to build a crop enterprise budget. Has anybody in this room done that? I know, at least. Has anybody ever built a crop enterprise budget? A couple people. So the way that I suggest, if you would turn to the crop journal sheet that you ought to have, and I'll pull that up. And there are so many formats for this, so don't get too overwhelmed. We probably ought to back up here a second and talk about the big picture. Because if you've never done a crop enterprise budget and you grow how many crops?
Probably like 40 or 50, including some different varieties.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't realistically, don't expect yourself to do a great crop enterprise budget on every crop in the first season that you try this. This is kind of like dieting. If you do it too whole hog, you're going to end up quitting and gaining all that weight back. The best way to do this is to be reasonable. Set some goals in the wintertime about what you'd like to do this year. You know, the goal number 1, which ought to be just baseline, is to keep all your receipts and record them. Goal number 2 is to keep all your invoices. So record all your expenses, record all your invoices, as much by category as you can. Now, getting into crop analysis is really a little bit harder. So pick the 3 crops to do this year. The one that you're most worried about, one that maybe you think has more potential than you've been able to exploit, something you want to try, or just your biggest crops, the ones that account for most of your revenues. Because if you're wrong about those, they're hurting your business the most. So that's how I would sort of prioritize that. And then the best thing to do is to keep a crop journal. And Carl and I talked about how he would do this at his farm. And what's great about keeping this crop journal is that it helps with food safety, it helps with GAP, it'll help with certified organic. There's all kinds of other benefits that if you're keeping this, not only does it help with the financial analysis, but it'll help you, as Atina said to me over and over again, it actually helps you become a much better farmer. And you can benchmark yourself because other people have done these things and you can see how you're doing on that crop. But all you do is have a clipboard. He would have it in the packing shed where his crew takes lunch, so that at lunchtime, before they sit down and eat, well, however you want to manage that, just have everybody go up there, put the date, put their initials. If you've gotten to the level with food safety of having a field number for your fields, didn't Atina talk about that yesterday? Having a field number. It's not hard to have a field number, actually. And if you could have right up next to this a field map, so that if your workers didn't know the field number, they could reference it. And just have them put the field number and what they did that day and how much time they spent and whether they used any equipment. You do need to know how much time you're spending on using your equipment. Are there any questions about this? Is anybody reacting, going, oh my goodness, it's not going to happen?
I would, under the task, I would make sure that if there was harvesting involved, that there was some sort of specificity in what your crew is actually doing. In other words, Carl has spent 2 hours and he's picked 2 bushels of beans or a bushel of beans or something like that, so that that's the kind of stuff that you need. That's the kind of information that you need in order to move on and build one of these crop enterprise budgets. You need some detail.
Well, and the reason I would emphasize how important what Carl just said is because, as with any analysis, garbage in, garbage out. If your records, if the data you collect is not good, or if you're just making it up off your head and you're wrong, the results of your analysis will be wrong. So these spreadsheets aren't magic. They don't do the work for you, unfortunately. You've got to put in really good data. So this is why my suggestion is pick 1 crop, pick 3 crops. You can't do 40 crops. You can't build an enterprise budget for 40 crops in your first year of attempting this. So set some priorities. I will tell you, for those of you who are a little bit more, have wireless and smartphones on the farm, there's a great tool that I can set you up with and show you how to do it. And I think it's like $10. It's an expensive app. It's $10. And it's called HandDBase. Has anybody used it? And it's not for farms. You use it?
Yeah, we use it as a research farm. We collect data and done that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great tool because it's actually not built for farmers or anything. It's built for anybody. It's HAN and then capital D base. And you design it. It just basically allows you to create any kind of spreadsheet like this on your iPhone. So when you're out there in the field or taking a break at the pack shed, you can just, isn't that amazing? I know. And, it'll work for some people and not for others.
So the beauty of that is, I understand it. I mean, I walk around with a little spiral-bound notebook in my back pocket with a pencil, right? And that works for me. Yeah. But as Ellen was explaining to me, it actually makes sense to maybe go this route, because you could just download that information.
Isn't that awesome? Downloads into Excel if you didn't hear that, which for me, I'm a nerd, so I love that.
How do you transfer the tractor hours or your equipment hours into money?
Okay. I love the segues. People are heading me up for the segues. Okay. Let's go for, there's several categories. She was just saying, how do you transfer the hours, because that's all you're doing here is recording hours, into a dollar amount. So let's look at the vehicle analysis sheet. We'll do, because it applies to a tractor or vehicle rate worksheet. You have that? Vehicle rate worksheet. So what you'll do for your tractor is just very similar. You know, any large piece of equipment, it's not exactly the same, but the template is very, very similar. So what you're doing first is you're saying, in this case, it's a truck. And if you have a truck, you're keeping mileage records for tax purposes, probably, in terms of how much of that is used on the farm versus not. Is that familiar? Anybody have any questions about that? I see one nodding head. You have a question, let me know. Okay. So the 90%, you know, I just made that up, but you would be able to get that from your mileage records, what that top number is, what percentage of this vehicle is used on the farm. Now, in the case of a tractor, you don't need to worry about that. Annual mileage from farm operations, again, you're going to have that number from your mileage records. Your mileage per gallon, most people usually have a pretty good sense of what that is. Fuel prices, that one you have to change periodically. So put in the fuel price. And then this automatically calculates what your per mile fuel cost is, your per mile variable cost on the vehicle is. You can see the 38 and 46 cents up there. And then you want to start to add in your annual repair and maintenance costs. Now, because you were taking such good records with your receipts, you know that number, right? So remember when we were recording receipts, you have to record by vehicle or by major piece of equipment. That's why, because that's where that $800 comes from. Again, this is all made up. I didn't actually do this yet with Carl, but
This is not mine.
no, I was just, although we had a conversation. Yeah, I know. We still don't know. We're gonna figure this out. Actually, the cool thing about this kind of analysis is it doesn't change that much from year to year, except for the fuel costs. So once you've done this, and this is also true of your crop enterprise budget. So as much as I'm probably overwhelming you all, once you do these things, they're pretty good. So that's why I say chunk it. Don't try to do the entire world in your first year. Say to yourself, I'm really concerned about my delivery costs to grasshoppers. I need to figure that one out and work on that vehicle or work on that tractor and work on a couple of crops. Because once you do these, they're really pretty darn set until you buy a new vehicle or, you know, something like that. So you have your maintenance costs in there. The only thing I will say about maintenance costs is you've kept those receipts, but you know how it is. Maintenance costs vary year to year a lot. Like one year you spend $1,000 and the next year you spend $50. So you do kind of want to use a little judgment in that number, look at what you've been spending, and make a reasonable estimate. You don't want to necessarily have your high in there or your low in there. You want to look at the average that you might even, you put in a number there that you feel pretty conservative about, that you feel like, okay, if I had that amount of money set aside, I would feel pretty safe. Does that make sense? And then, you know, taxes, registration, insurance, all those are real concrete numbers. So now I'm up to 52 cents per mile for that vehicle. And now what I want to do is consider, is my thing working? There we go. Consider what the cost is of replacement of that vehicle. Some people call this depreciation. Have you all heard that term? I don't like those big accounting terms. The heck with those. What matters is you need to have your farm covering enough cost, you know, giving you enough revenue that you can set a little bit aside into a savings account so that for those big, huge repair costs. That's the goal. That's what you want your goal to be for your farm revenue, is that you're able to set up savings accounts so that when the emergency comes, when the truck breaks down, when you have a huge cost on the tractor, you've got a little bit of money set aside. So this calculation is just enabling you to get to the point where you are recovering the full cost of those pieces of equipment. So when you sit down and plan with Laura, you want to make sure that the prices you're getting are going to cover 62 cents a mile every time you go to Grasshoppers, okay? Does anybody have any questions about this and how this is done? Yeah.
How do you calculate labor that you've done on your own vehicles? So that the
Yeah.
cost of that.
Right. Yeah, I would, you have to make a decision about what your assigned value is. Most farmers I know value themselves at $10, which is, it is what it is. But that seems to be a fairly common, every farmer I've ever asked, they say they give themselves about $10. But that's up to you. Value yourself at something, that question about how you value your own labor to some degree comes down to what is this farm about for you? That's sort of one of those big esoteric questions about what is this whole enterprise about? What balance, if it's a business, then you should probably value yourself at $50 an hour, right? I mean, if you're, you know what I mean? If this is about lifestyle and your family and you've made this choice, which most farmers I know have for a variety of reasons, then the amount you're giving yourself isn't as huge of a thing. You have to value your time, though. I mean, 10 would be the absolute basement number that I would want to see anybody using, because there gets to be